May 1940. Washington and Detroit. A voice on the radio dares America to build 50,000 aircraft a year. Berlin laughs. Tokyo shrugs. On factory floors, still smelling of peacetime oil, foremen, chalk lines where none exist yet. This is the shocking truth. The air war will not be settled by exquisite craftsmanship, but by scale, by takt-timed jigs, interchangeable parts, and trains of 100-octane rumbling night and day. Quality matters only when multiplied. The Axis bets on the perfect blade. The Allies forge 1,000,000. The hook is simple quantity, not elegance, will decide who flies and wins. In 1940-41, the Axis prides itself on engineering purity and the aura of craftsmen. Messerschmitt fits razor-tight panels by hand. Daimler-Benz blueprints gleam with tolerances. Heinkel welders brag about seams you can barely see. The Zero floats on long range and delicate lightness, proof that artful minimalism can beat brute force. Staff officers mistake elegance for capacity. They preach short, decisive wars sustained by boutique factories, numerous variants, and frequent field mods. Production managers prefer perfection to pace. Redesigns pile up. Tooling changes freeze lines. Sub-suppliers wait for exact parts that never arrive on time. Skilled machinists are scarce and protected. Jigs are bespoke. Interchangeability remains an afterthought. When raids begin, dispersion multiplies problems. Every shop is special, every fix local. Monthly targets slip, yet pride persists. Better a few thoroughbreds than a herd. They count quality twice and time not at all. Meanwhile, procurement cycles stretch. Training pipelines shorten. Fuel budgets tighten. Granular excellence hides systemic fragility. Drawings proliferate, spares diverge, and the maintenance burden climbs with every glamorous upgrade. On paper, the Axis owns the edge. On the floor, it owns delays. The creed is clear craft, first flow later, and that creed will prove unbearably slow. In war, fatal. They laughed for reasons that sounded rational inside drawing rooms paneled with blueprints. Start with complexity, the Axis equated intricacy with superiority. A fighter that demanded hand-lapped bearings, bespoke cowl panels, and tolerances whispered rather than spoken, looked like excellence incarnate. The Bf-109 accumulated variants E to F to G to K, each a sliver sharper, each a step more idiosyncratic. The FW-190 arrived with clever modularity on paper, yet still drank machine hours each time a change order moved from desk to jig. In workshops, humming with pride gauges read microns, not minutes. The clock on the wall was decoration. Then cost. Not merely money, but cost measured in what a system surrenders to polish one more edge. Precision fixtures are expensive. Changing them is more expensive. Every improvement to an airframe multiplies unique parts, complicates procurement, and forces toolmakers to retime the dance. Add the costs hidden in the supply web: heat-treated alloys, high-octane fuel fractions, ball-bearing production, guarded like crown jewels, and you get an engineering cathedral that cannot seat a crowd. Even in 1941-42, the forms were ornate while the congregation, the monthly output, stayed small. And time the Axis spent it as if victory waited politely. Tooling swaps didn't merely pause a line, they fractured rhythm. Craftsmen invaluable and irreplaceable became bottlenecks by definition, each master fitter the single narrow bridge through which a wing or engine must pass. Wartime improvisation field mods, one-off fixes mid-run, aerodynamic tweaks looked agile but punished tact. Every divergence spawned a new parts tree, a new maintenance manual, a new failure mode. Production dispersed under bombing pressure, but dispersion without deep interchangeability is just many ways to be late. They also laughed because they misread America. Factory photos from 1940 showed scattered peacetime lines, Douglas and Boeing humming but not roaring. Auto plants stamping chrome, not cowlings. To Axis planners, the American boast of 50,000 aircraft per year sounded like a pep talk, not a production schedule. They framed U.S. industry as soft, too unionized, too consumerist, too dependent on comfort to tolerate the iron monotony of wartime throughput. If German machinists were violinists, they told themselves Americans were drummers, loud, tireless, and imprecise. Drums don't win concert competitions. Finally, they trusted elegance as a strategy. The Zero's weight-shaving grace, the Me-262's jet, promised the romance of a perfectly tuned Daimler-Benz. These were talismans. A few dozen wonder machines, it was believed, could decisively tilt a theater. That belief licenses scarcity. If one aircraft does the work of three, then building one is almost thrift. On spreadsheets framed by optimism, small numbers cast long shadows. But war refuses to grade on beauty. Complexity turns brittle when the system around it erodes, when skilled labor is drafted, when fuel allocations shrink, when rail cars vanish, when ball-bearing plants go dark. Cost compounds across 1,000 small frictions. Time becomes the one currency you cannot borrow. The Axis laughed because their calculus rewarded craft over flow variant, over volume refinement, over repeatability. They counted the sharpness of the blade and forgot to count how many blades could be drawn at dawn tomorrow and the day after that. Quality isolated from quantity becomes a museum, quiet, immaculate, and empty. The joke then sat on the fulcrum of three linked truths: complexity slows, cost spreads, time kills. The result was inevitable arithmetic. However lethal a squadron of exquisite fighters might be, a squadron can only fly so many sorties, replace so many losses, absorb so much wear before mathematics, production, spares, engines, pilots reclaims the sky. The laugh made sense in the workshop. It died in the ledger. Across the Atlantic, the United States confronted a blunt, unglamorous reality: quantity was not optional. The air war demanded not hundreds but tens of thousands of reliable aircraft. Not boutique engines, but rivers of them. Not clever one-offs, but parts that fit on site in any depot on Earth. The problem had multiple faces. First, time to field. Training pipelines for pilots, crew chiefs, and armorers meant that aircraft had to arrive on a schedule, not in bursts. An Air Force cannot surge in December and starve in January. Sorties and spares live and die by cadence. Second, maintenance at scale. Anything that could not be swapped in the rain by a 19-year-old with a tech order and a torque wrench was effectively a future grounded airplane. Reliability wasn't a luxury. It was the oxygen of operations. Third, logistics geometry. The United States would fight from Britain to Burma to the Bismarck Sea, which meant every additional unique part number multiplied lift requirements, warehouse complexity, and delay. Complexity grows exponentially across oceans. So the American answer began not with the airplane, but with a philosophy: mass production as doctrine. That meant designing for manufacture, simplifying fasteners, standardizing gauges, breaking assemblies into station-sized tasks. It meant jigs and fixtures that replaced virtuoso fitters with repeatable positioning. Interchangeability so ruthless that a wing panel from Plant A would bolt to a fuselage from Plant B without persuasion. It meant takt-time, explicit minutes per station posted on boards and defended like a runway. It meant statistical quality control that caught drift before drift caught a squadron at altitude. Institutionally, the problem required a national metronome. The War Production Board mapped bottlenecks. Priority ratings told steel, aluminum, and machine tools where to go. Knudsen and the automotive barons reconfigured flow like they were re-gearing a nation. Auto plants learned to think in rivets and ribs. Aircraft plants learned to think in flow lines rather than craft rooms. Suppliers were layered so that a broken link no longer broke a theater. Engines, R1830s, R2800s, were treated as a separate war with test stands running day and night to keep failure curves honest. Culturally, it demanded a trade glory for throughput. Engineers had to resist the siren song of mid-run improvements that cost weeks and paid back inches. Program managers learned to freeze a configuration and harvest gains in rate rather than refinement. Where the Axis reached upward for a better blade, the U.S. reached outward for another line, another shift, another supplier, another train of fuel. When tooling had to change, it changed once everywhere by plan, with kits pre-positioned and work instructions drafted down to the wrist motion. The aircraft themselves reflected the shift. A P-51 redesigned for long-range escort with drop tanks was not just an aerodynamic triumph. It was a supply chain victory. Tanks stamped by the 1,000 plumbing standardized mounts, identical manuals revised and distributed in weeks. A B-24 leaving Willow Run was less a plane than a theorem. If you force station balance, enforce interchangeability, and design for crane cart and hand aluminum, becomes lift at industrial speed. This is the untold problem, because it is unromantic. It lives in tact charts, not dogfights, in carton counts, not kill counts. But it is the problem that wins wars. The United States needed weapons that were good enough identically, endlessly, that could be built by new hands, maintained by tired hands, and replaced by the thousands without pausing to admire them. Mass production was not a boast. It was a moral that the surest way to keep a pilot alive tomorrow was to put an airplane in his revetment today, and another behind it, and another behind that, until even the enemy's mathematics gave up. Autumn, 1941. Willow Run, Michigan. On a table the size of a bowling lane, a paper factory appears. Before the factory exists, rectangles for press shops, long ribs for assembly bays, dotted lines for conveyors that must move wings as if they were bread. The audacity is not the airplane, it's the flow. Henry Ford's lieutenants walk the chalk and say what car men always say: the line should do the thinking, not the worker. The impossible idea is to build a four-engined heavy bomber the way you build a sedan. Outside, the corn still stands. Inside, they pour concrete by the acre, sink anchor bolts for jigs and fixtures as tall as houses, and order machine tools like they are buying time itself. Each fixture is a memory device. It positions metal so precisely that a new hand trained yesterday can repeat an expert's motion today, all day. No mystique, just geometry. Across the continent in Inglewood, California, North American aviation tunes a faster song. The P-51 is not merely engineered to fly, it is engineered to assemble. Sub-assemblies shrink to station-sized work spars drilled to templates, skin panels, pre-punched harness looms measured to loom boards, plumbing bent on formers with stops. A green badge worker steps up, and because the fixture is smarter than he is, he can be excellent immediately. That is the trick. In Wichita, where B-29 sections crown the skyline, the choreography becomes monumental. Fuselage barrels arrive on dollies, mate on a turntable, and are riveted by squads that move by whistle and tact board. Quality is no longer a post-flight sermon. It's a real-time chart on a supervisor's clipboard: first pass yield rework, minutes scrap pounds per 1,000 holes. Deviation is a crime against schedule. In East Hartford, where Pratt & Whitney churns out R-2800s, test stands throb like an organ. Engines run to failure on purpose, failure curves mapped into process changes by morning. What can be shaved off a minute is shaved. What can be moved upstream is moved. The engine is a system. The system is a calendar. The date clicks forward: January 1942, March 1943, May 1944. Each month, the bulletin boards change their digits. Last month, 1-600. This month, 2-100. Target higher. The miracle is not hidden in a single invention. It spreads like literacy. Standard gauges replace shop lore. Go/no-go pins replace arguments. Shadow boards replace pockets. Kits arrive staged to the station, not the building. A rivet is a rivet anywhere. A torque value is a sentence everyone can read. What looked to outsiders like a Carman invasion of aviation is in fact an ideology of time. When a drawing changes, it changes once, and kit lists, tool crib cards, inspection sheets, and training slides change the same day. A frozen baseline is not conservatism. It is how you win against geography. The Luftwaffe can disperse plants. America disperses competence. At Willow Run, the mile-long line grows, its legend wings meet fuselages, as if preordained tailplanes swing in engines, drop to mounts, cowl rings, step forward, props are trammed, and a B-24 breathes. That it once took many days is less interesting than what the clock says now, about an hour per finished bomber at peak cadence, and arithmetic of flow that frightens staff officers more than any dogfight. Back in the conference rooms, the old words die hard: craft, pride, elegance. But on the floor, pride has changed its uniform. It looks like a forewoman who hits her station time 6 shifts running. It looks like statistical process control dots marching in a tight band. It looks like a rail car of 100 octane that arrives on time because priority ratings, the quiet dictatorship of the War Production Board, told steel, aluminum bearings, and solvents where to be before anyone asked. And because this is war, the line does not stop at the plant door. C-47s make the factory's promise good in France. P-51s make it good over Leipzig. B-24s make it good over Ploest. B-29s write it in fire over the Marianas. The place is everywhere the date is now, and the impossible idea is no longer an idea. It is an institution designed for manufacture, build for flow, plan for replacement. The Axis still believes excellence lives in the hands. America has proved it also lives in the system. The corn is gone. In its place stand hangars that empty themselves by schedule. People will later call it a miracle. It was work organized, measured, defended. That is the genius. Numbers then the unromantic music of victory. Throughput. By 1944, the United States is turning out aircraft at a clip that approaches 100,000 in a single year. Germany peaks far lower, tens of thousands fewer despite a fevered late-war push. Japan trails still further. Convert that into a fighter duel, and the ratio reads simply: for every Axis aircraft completed, multiple Allied airframes roll out, and crucially spares and engines to keep them flying. Cycle time. A bomber that once consumed days of bay time slides through balanced stations where each job fits a minute budget. At Willow Run, the folklore becomes fact, roughly 1 Liberator per hour at peak cadence. Fighters compress further, station minutes measured, buffers, right-sized changeovers scripted. Where the Axis loses hours to bespoke fitting and mid-run tweaks, the U.S. buys hours with frozen baselines and kit discipline. Labor productivity. Craft bottlenecks dissolve into fixture logic. 1 expert fitter becomes 10 competent operators because the jig thinks. Training shrinks from months to days on specific tasks. Each added shift multiplies output cleanly because work content per station is stable. Axis plants dispersed and variant-ridden cannot copy this without copying the philosophy first. Interchangeability. A wing panel born in San Diego mates to a fuselage born in Fort Worth without a meeting. Depot mechanics swap a magneto in rain at midnight because part numbers mean the same thing in Burtonwood and Biak. Axis forces variance within variance. See ground crews become curators of unique problems. Every deviation is a tax on readiness. Quality at rate. Quality versus quantity is a false duel. Statistical quality control keeps first-pass yield high enough that added rate does not drown the field in rework. Scrap falls as fixtures mature. Defect. Pareto charts drive redesign only when the data warrants it. The Axis often buys quality with time, slow assembly, hand-fitting rework time that bombing fuel shortages and labor churn make unaffordable by 1943 to 444. Change control. Improvement is not banned. It is batched. Engineering changes ride scheduled block upgrades, so the entire chain drawings, jigs, kits, manuals, training flips in sync. The Axis, chasing the front with swift field mods and microvariants, accumulates complexity debt. Spare parts fragment. Documentation lags. Maintenance soaks flying hours. Cost and risk. Dollar figures matter less than predictability. Fixed tooling amortized over thousands crushes unit cost volatility. Suppliers sign to priority ratings that triage metal and bearings across a continent. When a plant takes a bomb, the network flexes. When a supplier slips, a qualified second source exists. Axis dispersion under pressure lacks the connective tissue, standard parts, common tooling, shared gauges to keep rhythm. Put it together, and the secret reads: plainly flow beats flourish. A nation that can freeze a design, drive tact, hold quality in control limits, and deliver interchangeable parts to any latitude, will outfly an enemy that treats each airplane as a bespoke jewel. The decisive metric is not peak performance of the single best machine. It is sustained theater-wide availability: how many airframes with how many serviceable engines, with how many trained crews on how many mornings in a row. That metric bleeds into strategy. With P-51s carrying drop tanks by the tens of thousands, bomber escort doctrine flips from hope to guarantee. With transport fleets measured by the hundreds per wing, logistics hops become schedules, not gambles. With training commands fed a constant river of airframes, attrition is a cost you can pay without collapsing. Call it the Arsenal's theorem. Unlimited production capacity turns time into force. The Axis fights an aerial knife fight. The United States runs an industrial clock. Every tick is an airplane. Every talk is another. And when the sky itself fills with schedule, the outcome stops being a mystery and becomes a plan. February 20th, 1944. The morning freezes on runways across England, and the map on the wall is a chalk storm over Germany. They call it Operation Argument, but the crews call it Big Week, and nothing about the brief is small. Columns of B-17s and B-24s bristle down the taxiways like moving scaffolds. Fuel trucks scurry, armorers slap belts home. Above them, the new constant P-51s in rows, steel gray, and impatient drop tanks glinting with the promise we are staying all the way. From the tower, the formation looks like a factory, breaking gravity lines, spacing cadence stations in the sky. Wheels lift, flaps tuck, and the air fills with a scheduled thunder. Radios are clipped terse. The mission clock is a tyrant that nobody hates. They climb through the clotted English weather and burst into sun over the Channel silver cities migrating east. Past the coastline, contrails braid and harden. The Mustangs push out front and high, then swing back like sheepdogs, then slash forward again. Fuel checks marry the plan. The plan marries the range marries the target. What used to be a bet, will they be there when the intercept comes, is now a certainty printed on an operations board the night before. The first German vectors appear as needles across the sky. Controllers on the ground say headings and altitudes in voices that have learned to be careful. The interceptors angle in steep and fast as they always have. The difference is volume. Instead of a thin escort, there are waves of Mustangs led cover, and another cover layered behind that, with the legs to loiter, to fight to reform, and to fight again. Contact. The first merges cut contrails into cursive. The P-51s roll and dive, 8 guns riding percussion into wings and engine cowlings. Some Germans break through and light a bomber, and a crew rides fire until the parachutes bloom, a reminder that this is still a meat grinder. But the grinder has changed owners. They keep going. Leipzig, Brunswick, Regensburg, because the point is less the single target than pressure itself. Assembly plant's engine works ball-bearing mills, not a silver bullet, a silver river. Every hour, the river strengthens. By the 4th day of Big Week, the Luftwaffe's hunting grounds feel occupied. By the 6th, the tone on German radios is clipped to bone. June 6, 1944. The air over Normandy looks different in kind. The inventory of airplanes becomes terrain. Tactical squadrons scissor the beachhead, and the heavies sow far inland, while transports C-47s, in docile herds, thread the air with parachutes in the dark hours. The weapon is not the single airframe, but the schedule that keeps them arriving. A German artillery observer looks up and finds no gaps to write home about. The knives still flash Flak-Focke-Wulf's panic, but they flash inside a storm they did not summon and cannot disperse. Later that summer, the missions to Berlin and beyond push the doctrine to its limit and then move the limit. Drop tanks multiply the margin. Maintenance crews turn airplanes from shot-up to airworthy in times that would have made peacetime inspectors faint. Crews step again and again into the same ritual because the line demands it. It is not glamorous and it is not fair, but it is effective. Where once the daylight offensive felt like an heroic gamble, now it feels like a rail timetable backed by a continent. On the ground, German civilians count the cadence too. Sirens shelters the distant mechanical whine that says the bearings plant is a target today and the engine works tomorrow. On airfields, ground crews pull cowlings on fighters that flew too long yesterday and will fly again today because there is no alternative. Pilots strap in on fewer hours than their mentors and look up into a geometry of contrails that behaves like an industry. Trial by fire is not one battle. It is repeatability under combat conditions. In the debrief tents, the crews speak in numbers, fuel to the gallon time on station to the minute aircraft serviceable at dawn to the head count. War once narrated in aces and miracles becomes a spreadsheet you can touch. And when a nation can fly its spreadsheet over your capital every week, the trial is already grading itself. At first, the feeling is familiar. Scramble, climb, find the bomber stream, choose the angle, /survive. But the echo inside the headset is new. They are still here. 10 minutes after the merge, after you burn energy and spend ammunition and break away under a Mustang's shadow, you expect the sky to thin. It doesn't. Another escort element swings in with drop tanks scuffed but still feeding, and your controller's voice loses its adjectives. On the ground, the maintenance hut smells like solvent and sleep. The chalkboard that used to carry hopeful sortie numbers now carries reasons: fuel short, pilot sick, parts delayed, airfield damaged. You rub a smudge beside prop governor and realize the part exists somewhere, but not here, not now, and not in time. The Americans have made in time the only metric that matters. You launch anyway. A climb, a vector, a prayer. Then the bomber stream materializes like a city you cannot evict. Your friend keys his mic with a joke he's used since 1941. Something about plucking turkeys. The joke unravels when two Mustangs fall on him from a place your eyes did not check, because no escort ever had that range before. He rolls flames briefly, and the parachute never opens. You do not mark the kill board. You mark replacement forms that will not be filled. In the ready room after the talk shrinks. No more long sermons about better airframes coming next quarter, faster, this, higher, that. The jet, yes, marvelous, but the runway is cratered. The fuel is thin, and the pilot's hours are a fraction of what the jet demands. The romance of quality withers under the arithmetic of availability. The staff slides a graph across the table: training hours, down losses, up serviceability, a sawtooth with more tooth than saw. Someone says we need to concentrate our fighters. Someone else says concentrate what? At night, the city's lights are banned by decree. By day, the contrails are mandated by the enemy. You wake to sirens and you sleep to them. The big plants move underground. The small shops move to basements. Dispersion breeds its own chaos. Unique gauges here, misfit jigs. They're men who know one variant but not the next. Every improvement bought with time buys less. You stop asking for the perfect blade. You ask for blades. The realization is not a headline. It is a daily subtraction. The enemy has made attrition a planned economy. They can lose bombers and fill the stands again. They can burn through engines and ship more from a map's width away. They can rotate escorts like shifts. You can fly brilliantly for 15 minutes and discover your brilliance priced against hours and tons and heads and gallons that you cannot summon. One afternoon, in a flak tower that shakes like a wounded drum, a colonel says the quiet part without ceremony. This is a war of replacement. We replace slower. No one argues. In the mess that evening, a younger pilot asks whether better tactics will save them. An older one looks at his hands and says tactics saved us when numbers tied. Numbers have untied the knot. The fear that follows is not cinematic. It is administrative forms that never return, stamped approved crates, that never arrive, trains that never clear, orders that contradict orders because the front moved while the typewriter slept. You know it in your bones the next time you climb. If you are shot down, a boy will wear your helmet tomorrow with fewer hours and a thinner margin, and the sky will be just as full. Some nights, the engines of the enemy write a low thunder over your city, and you think of the early days when laughter lived in briefings and production was a rumor. The laughter has gone. In its place is a long, disciplined sound, the sound of a factory that learned to fly, and the private knowledge that you are fighting time and time has chosen the other side. When the dust settles and the ledgers open, the shape of victory is not a secret weapon, but a slope on a graph. The American curve airframes, completed engines, shipped octane refined pilots, graduated rises, early bends, steeper through 1943, and keeps climbing into 1944. The axis curves, even when they momentarily flick upward under emergency programs, cannot match the area under the line. Strategy follows arithmetic. Air forces fight two wars at once, one over the front, one over the calendar. The Luftwaffe's frontline brilliance tactics, nervy leadership, flashes of innovation cannot reverse a schedule that delivers more aircraft, more often with more spares. As bomber escort turns from gamble to guarantee, the 8th Air Force and its partners acquire the one asset Airpower had always lacked: reliability of presence. That reliability is bred in factories, not in dogfights. It flattens German production by hammering engine works, ball bearings, airframe assembly, and most punishingly trained manpower, a drain the Reich can neither replace nor hide. The strategic effects compound. Pilot training hours shrink, fuel allocations thin, maintenance backlogs thicken. Each attempt to buy back quality field mods, late war fighters' jets, adds delay and diversity, which is to say, friction. Dispersed plants multiply their own confusion gauges that differ by a millimeter, fixtures bespoke to one town, documentation that cannot keep up. In contrast, an Allied magneto pulled from a crate in Burtonwood fits the same as one in Bayak. Interchangeability turns geography from a foe into a mild inconvenience. Logistics becomes force. C-47s changed the map's texture, converting risk into routine Herculean in 1942, scheduled by 1944. Air-ground teams in Normandy, Italy, and the Marianas discover that close air support and interdiction scale when aircraft availability scales. 1,000 small tactical margins add up to a strategic verdict. The enemy's rail network fractures under repeated strikes, not because any single day is decisive, but because every day is dependable. On the Eastern Front, German units look west for relief that no longer arrives in meaningful mass. In the Pacific, Japanese garrisons watch the sky and count only promises. Even where the Axis achieves tactical surprise, Ardennes, late 1944, the reprieve is brief. Weather lifts, the industrial clock resumes, sorties flow. Replacement airframes and crews backfill wounds faster than the attacker can metabolize gains. Air superiority widens from a daytime corridor to an all-weather policy. The line, not the knife, writes the campaign. By 1945, the qualitative boasts that animated Axis doctrine lighter, faster. Purer, read like poetry, written in a factory siren's key. The Me-262, terrifying on paper, starves on concrete realities. Fuel runways spares time on instruments for pilots who need hundreds of hours they will never receive. The Zero's early war grace meets a sky dense with radar radios, altitude performance, and numbers that do not tire. The United States has made next sortie a promise and next month a plan. In retrospect, the Allied victory in the air is strangely modest in explanation. It is not that American aircraft were always better. They were good enough everywhere endlessly. It is not that Allied crews never broke. They did and were replaced. It is not that the Axis lacked genius. It abounded, but genius cannot substitute for availability. The decisive asymmetry is this: one side built an industrial doctrine that treated time as a weapon and scale as strategy. Once that doctrine matured, once Willow Run hit cadence, once P-51s escorted on schedule, once engines and octane arrived like utility service, the Axis's celebrated quality could no longer find a battlefield big enough to matter. The war machine did not merely roll, it kept rolling, and that continuity made the opponent's isolated excellence irrelevant. After the surrender, the bravado drains out of the transcripts. The men who once mocked American capacity now speak in the dry past tense of audits. Albert Speer, who watched the Reich's production buckle under sustained pressure, would later acknowledge in substance that once the Allies, above all the United States, brought their factories fully to bear, the issue became time, not possibility. Factories, he conceded, decide wars when they can outlast bombing, fuel scarcity, and training losses, when they can keep sending engines, wings, and men faster than the front can break them. Hermann Göring, the air marshal who once scoffed at the idea of 50,000 aircraft per year, faced Nuremberg stripped of spectacle. The record around him, graphs of sorties, losses, production curves, did not argue. It added. Laughing at numbers had been easy. Living under them had not. And Adolf Galland, the fighter leader who knew courage intimately, put it in a sentence that pilots understood. When the Mustangs appeared over Berlin, the war was lost. The line is not a compliment to a single airframe. It is a recognition that range at scale, escorts that stayed day after day, made interception a losing trade and attrition a certainty. From Tokyo's Naval Staff Studies to German field commanders' memoirs, the refrain converges: the Allies turned production into a weapon system. They froze designs when it helped flow. They changed them everywhere when it helped reliability. They measured quality so it could survive speed. The Axis, wedded to elegance and scattered by necessity, answered with brilliance that could not be repeated enough times. There is no romance in this verdict, only relief and warning. Relief that democracy's capacity for work could be organized faster than tyranny's capacity for fear. Warning that in modern war the schedule is the sharpest blade. When the factory learned to fly, the outcome ceased to be a debate and became an accounting.